In this video, we're looking at the NBA draft class from this past season, comparing it to some of the other rookie draft classes, and trying to avoid the minefield of drafting those rookies a little too early. Before we get started, if this is your first time here, hey, do me a favor, hit the little subscribe button, the notification bell, drop some comments, like the video, do all the things to keep my self-esteem up. And when you're done with this video, go check what we dropped last week where we ranked the top 20 NBA guards for this upcoming fantasy season. Now, we might all be Wembanyama pilled. Wemby and Chet Holmgren both put in historic rookie seasons. Chet Holmgren, who finished second in Rookie of the Year voting, probably would have won Rookie of the Year every single year over the last 10 years, outside of maybe what we saw from Luka in 2019. The Frenchman last year averaged over 21 points, 10 boards, and almost 4 freaking blocks per game. Was an absolute fantasy god, and especially the second half of the year, what we saw from him was absolutely incredible. And Chet Holmgren, on the other hand, he put up a 16-8 with a few blocks himself. We also saw pretty impressive performances from rookies like Charlotte Hornets, Brandon Miller, even Jaime Jaquez for the Miami Heat, Brandon Pajemski, the pod god from the Golden State Warriors, and Keontae George from the Utah Jazz. However, there's a couple differences between what we saw from last season's rookies and this season's rookies that make the fantasy landscape just so very different. And one of them is the fact that the talent level is so much different from last year to this year. We already gave you the highlights from last season, but heading into this NBA draft class, you heard podcast after podcast breaking down how this may be the worst draft class we've seen in over a decade. Now, that doesn't mean these guys are going to be bad NBA players. I'm sure we're going to have a few pop up, maybe even an all-star or two in this class. But we're talking about this NBA season and how many of the guys that have been drafted are even going to make a meaningful fantasy impact in year one of their career. Now, the other dynamic is where these players landed, because Wemby and Chet are the exception, not the rule. No matter where they landed, they would have had a monster fantasy impact. But when you look at the guys like Jaime Jaquez, Brandon Pajemski, and Keontae George, they had to kind of finagle their way into a role that I'm not sure people were expecting them to have their rookie year. So with that being said, let's take a look at the most recent NBA rookie draft class, where they landed, and if there's any we should be targeting, or maybe more importantly, avoid. Now, I'm not sure how many of you have even seen highlights of the guy who went number 1 to the Atlanta Hawks, and that's the Frenchman, Zaccharie Risacher.
Bonjour.
And the one good thing we have going for him is the last guy we saw go number 1 overall from France, well, he was pretty dominant. However, I'm not sure if Risacher has the same sort of upside that Victor Wembanyama has, but as we look at the Atlanta Hawks and what they've got going into this year, he is projected to start at the small forward, right? We saw the Hawks move off of DeJounte Murray, so we know Trae Young's going to be the point guard, and right now their starting 5 looks like Trae Young, maybe Bogdan Bogdanovic, who we saw cooking for Serbia there in the Olympics as they got the bronze medal, Risacher himself, maybe my favorite fantasy darling for this season, the 4-man Jalen Johnson, and then at the big, Clint Capella for as long as he's on the Atlanta Hawks before he inevitably gets traded, and then Onyeka Okongwu. But we should note that the Hawks have a weirdly deep team. I don't know if it's a good team, but they have a lot of guys that are going to get minutes. In that DeJounte Murray trade, they brought over Larry Nance Jr., they brought over Dyson Daniels. They still have DeAndre Hunter, and then David Roddy is also there. So out of all the rookies that we're going to talk about, especially in the top 10, I actually am a little bit interested in Risacher compared to the rest of them. Yes, there are a couple of guys he's going to be competing with. But say what you will about Trae Young, I do feel like he gets guys open shots, right? We saw Trae average over 25 and 10. That's 10 assists, which means 10 other people were scoring because of passes from Trae Young. Now, there's another caveat that helps rookies actually pop off from a fantasy perspective in their first year in the league, and that's their team being bad.
Tank.
One of the reasons I like targeting guys that are like on the Utah Jazz is because I know they are going to try to lose come February. It's why Keontae George was so exciting, because that second half of the year, he was playing 30 minutes a game and starting for the Jazz because they were trying to lose on purpose. Now, you look at this Atlanta Hawks roster, you think they'd be doing the same thing, except the Hawks don't have their first-round pick, so you know they're going to be trying, especially down the stretch. So though I do think Risacher is going to be fine, and when we compare him to a lot of the other guys in their rookie year, I think he might have a higher ceiling than most. I don't think he has that moonshot ceiling, considering he's getting drafted like pretty early on in underdog drafts, early in the hundreds, and how expensive he's inevitably going to be, whether it's on the So Rare streets or in an auction-type draft, because again, the last bit of basketball we saw was from Summer League, where rookies always look much better better than they are because they're playing guys who are fighting for two-way contracts or to get a deal in Europe. Next up, we have Alex Sarr, who was playing in Australia before heading on over to the NBA. He did not want to work out with the Atlanta Hawks, so he went to the Washington Wizards. Now, the Wizards are a weird team. The thing I do like about them is what we were talking about with the Utah Jazz a second ago. We know they are not going to be good, and they are going to try to lose, which means rookies should get a ton of run. However, I would say Alex Sarr isn't even my favorite rookie on the Wizards. Now, when we look at the depth chart, I do think Alex Sarr is going to start. I'm sure they're going to roll out some version of Malcolm Brogdon, Jordan Poole, Kyle Kuzma, maybe Sarr at the 4, and then my name is Jonas Valanciunas at the 5. But listen to all these guys they have behind him. Corey Kispert, my favorite Frenchman, Bilal Koulibaly. They still have the sandwich, PB&J, Patrick Baldwin Jr., and even Richaun Holmes. They also have Marvin Bagley. They've got so many bigs that they can use from. We also saw some crazy highlights from Alex Sarr at Summer League where he sure was rebounding the heck out of the ball while also going like 0 for a million from the field. Now, Alex Sarr is going 121st overall in this underdog best ball double dribble, which means he's going before guys like Dante DiVincenzo, Andrew Wiggins, Bogdan Bogdanovic, the Splash Bro himself, Klay Thompson, and some other bigs like Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, and Clint Capella. I do think Alex Sarr has upside as an NBA player, but I don't know if he has upside as a fantasy prospect in his rookie season. So give me all the guys that are going way after him. And one of the rookies I'm most excited about, mainly because he's a short king like myself, is Reed Sheppard, who went 3rd overall to the Houston Rockets and then lit up Summer League. Seems to be a guy that jumps into passing lanes, picks off a lot of passes, gets a ton of steals, and then can stretch the floor by knocking down the triple. Now, if Reed Sheppard was on almost literally any other NBA team, I'd be gobbling him up on drafts, getting in line for the So Rare auctions for his rookie card, and rostering him as often as possible. But the Houston Rockets have 400 dudes on their team that are going to get minutes. Their starting 5 most likely is going to look like this: Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr., and Alfie Şengün at the 5. Then we've got Amin Thompson, Tari Eason, Cam Whitmore, Jason Derulo Tate, and then Reed Sheppard. So I do think Reed Sheppard is going to have a role for this Rockets team, but do we think he's playing more than 15 to 18 minutes a game? And if that's the case, should we be drafting him as high as he's going? Because here are some other guards you can get for relatively the same price as Reed Sheppard right now. Benedict Mathurin, who's about to enter year 3 for the Indiana Pacers, who had some real upside, some spike weeks, however, got hurt, so maybe people forgot about him. The new OKC Thunder, Alex Caruso. The Chicago Bull, Ayo Dosunmu. Even Marcus Smart, Andrew Nembhard, and the problematic Porter, Kevin Porter Jr. Now, rattling off those names, Reed Sheppard's a fine dart throw. Maybe mix him in a little bit, but I would just temper the expectations because I do think when we think about these rookies, and he's a 3rd pick overall, and he was lighting up Summer League, that people want to get overweight on Reed Sheppard. And not to be all Lee Corso.
Not so fast, midget.
But not so fast. The 4th overall pick was UConn Husky Stephon Castle, who is joining the San Antonio Spurs. Now, we've been fairly negative so far through 3 picks, so I'm going to sprinkle a little positivity on you. I do think I'm going to be scooping up a little Stephon Castle. He's most likely not going to be starting for the Spurs, right? They got old man CP3, Chris Paul, the floor general himself. You're going to see Devin Vassell out there, who I love. And then the newly acquired Harrison Barnes playing the 3. Jeremy, I'm the Polish Dennis Rodman at the 4. And then, of course, the Frenchman, the 5, Victor Wembanyama. But Castle right next to Keldon Johnson are probably going to be the first 2 guys off of the bench. And I think I'm just interested in finding players who are paired up with Wembanyama. It's part of the reason I like Devin Vassell so much, because defenses are going to be confused as heck as to how to defend Wemby. And I just think, especially as Wembanyama gets more comfortable in the NBA, continues to evolve, it's just going to be so easy for players to have strong offensive performances next to a guy like that. Now, Castle's getting drafted close to Alex Sarr, so we've already rattled off some of the guys that he'd be going ahead of, which is a little concerning, but I do think I like betting on the upside of being surrounded by Victor Wembanyama. And the Spurs are still a team that have their own first-round pick. And even though I do think Wemby is going to vault himself into a first-team All-NBA conversation this year, the West is so freaking loaded. And maybe the Spurs do contend for that 10th seed spot. But they're going to be competing against teams like the Warriors, the Lakers, the Clippers, maybe the Suns, the Grizzlies, the Pelicans, and all of those teams are deeper and more talented than the San Antonio Spurs. So if we get to late February, when it's time to win your fantasy league, maybe the Spurs pull the plugs. They go full Utah Jazz on us. And if that happens, we might see Chris Paul be sitting a little bit more. Who knows? Chris Paul might even get traded closer to the trade deadline. And then bang, Castle's playing 30 plus minutes a game and he becomes a lightning rod for your fantasy team. We're going to jump around in the draft now. So pick 8, the Minnesota Timberwolves made a massive trade to jump up, take the San Antonio Spurs pick, and they picked up Rob Dillingham. Now, this was such an aggressive trade from the Timberwolves, but I actually really like it because we know they didn't have a lot of wiggle room financially to add on to this team that was sniffing the NBA Finals with Anthony Edwards ascending into superstardom. So they went out and tried to find a guy that could replace Mike Conley when Mike Conley's time is done with the Minnesota Timberwolves. However, I just said the Timberwolves were sniffing the NBA Finals, and I'm not sure if a rookie guard is going to be able to come in and play right away. But I do think this rookie is going to have a shorter leash than some of the rest of them because the Timberwolves are trying to win right now. When we look at the depth chart for the T-Wolves, you got Mike Conley starting at the 1, the Ant-Man himself at the 2, McDaniels at the 3, Cat at the 4, and Rudy at the 5. They also picked up Joe Ingles, who I don't know how much that Aussie has left in him, but he'll get a little bit of run. And then we saw Nickeil Alexander-Walker really take a step last season. They've got Leonard Miller, who's in his second year returning from injury. They also have Terrence Shannon Jr., who they drafted, who he really showed out at Summer League. And then, yes, Rob Dillingham. So I do think Rob's probably going to get first crack at that backup point guard minute, but I'm a little concerned at what that upside actually looks like because, again, the T-Wolves are trying to make a finals run right here, right now, and we don't get to benefit off those tanking minutes that some of these other rookies might have a shot at. Now, the plus side for Dillingham, at least on the underdog side of things, he's going 189th overall, so he's barely getting drafted, so I think that is a fine dart throw late there. But when we're talking about so rare and we know those rookie auctions are going to start happening, I'd be much more interested in getting Dillingham in his year 2 than in his year 1. We're going to cover 3 more rookies, and I promise to end with positivity. Now, there's definitely still some question marks here, but I want the huge big man from the Memphis Grizzlies, Zach Edey.
He's huge.
The Grizzlies were absolutely desperate for a big man, and it was clear because they probably took Edey a handful of picks earlier than draft experts assumed he was going to go. But when you look at the depth chart for the Grizzlies, you know they needed that big guy, right? They got Ja Morant starting at the 1, Desmond Bane at the 2, Marcus Smart at the 3, or maybe it's Bane at the 2 and Smart at the 3. I don't know. Those are the same guy to me. Jaren Jackson Jr. probably starting at the 4, which means the rookie Zach Edey is going to slide in that starting role right now. And again, the Grizzlies are a good team, so you could make the same case that we just did for Rob Dillingham and the Timberwolves that he's probably going to have a shorter leash because the Grizzlies are in win now mode. However, I do think a big like that absolutely excels in the type of offense the Grizzlies are going to run. We've seen Steven Adams, we've seen Jonas Valanciunas, guys like Brandon Clark can absolutely eat in this pick and roll style offense that Ja Morant runs. But I think we're going to see a lot of easy buckets for Zach Edey. And then on the rebounding side of things, well, we've seen Jaren Jackson Jr.'s ability to rebound, and it's hit or miss. So you're going to throw Edey out there, and he is going to be scooping up all of them. So I think even in limited minutes, he could be an easy double-double guy. Because when you look at the guys coming off the bench, it's not like there's a ton of competition for those big minutes, at least not as of right now. They've got Gigi Jackson and Vince Williams Jr., who are 2 players we've talked about in previous videos, which go check those out, that I'm a big fan of, but are not going to be taking Edey's minutes. You got Derrick Rose. I guess Santi Aldama could play small ball 5, but that's not really his role. And then the Canadian Brandon Clark. So Edey is probably the rookie that I'm most excited about from a fantasy perspective in their first season in the league. On Underdog, though, Edey's going right around pick 105, where he's sandwiched in between the OKC newly acquired Isaiah Hartenstein and Derek Lively, who's coming off an impressive rookie year of his own. So you're definitely paying for Edey, but I do think he's got the best shot at some real upside right off the bat. 2 more. The guy that went 11th overall, and yes, I met him this summer at Summer League, the Chicago Bull, Matas Buzelis. Now, I just want to say there's some real risk in this pick, and maybe it was me getting too excited from what I saw in Summer League as he was putting up highlight after highlight. But the Bulls are just in the weirdest spot, right? We saw DeMar DeRozan leave. He went to Sacramento. Zach LaVine has been on the trade block since 2003. And somehow they still have the big man Nikola Vucevic on this team. Now, I don't know what the trade value is for these guys, but I do know the Chicago Bulls aren't really trying to make a deep playoff run this year. And if there was ever a time to wave the white flag, pull the plug, it's probably now. So the risk with Buzelis comes with the fact that the Bulls might not move off of those guys. And if they don't, he might be buried deep into the depth chart. Because right now the Bulls starting 5 looks something like this. They got the new guy, Josh Giddey, Kobe White, who's coming off an incredible bounce back year last year, Zach LaVine, if he's healthy and ready, Patrick Williams, same thing for you, and then Nikola Vucevic. And off the bench, they have Ayo Dosunmu, who also had a pretty solid year last year, Jalen Smith, the big guy they acquired that really won't impact Buzelis too much, and then Matas Buzelis. So there's 2 paths forward for Buzelis having a positive season. LaVine gets traded, the Bulls start tanking. Both of those scenarios, Buzelis can pop. Now, you're not going to believe this, but I wasn't the only one that saw his highlights last season. So you can tell the audience is already excited for Buzelis as an underdog. He's going 115th overall, which means he's going right after guys like Pajemski, Russell Westbrook, Terry Rozier, and before guys like Mark Williams, Jaden Ivey, Naz Reid, Castle, Sarr, and Dante DiVincenzo. So we're paying a little bit of a price tag on Buzelis, but again, that's the upside that I'm looking for. Those teams that I know are not going to be competing for a playoff spot, and then are going to showcase some of these rookies down the stretch because they want to get them more playing time and secure the L. And before we take a look at that last rookie, I just want to say thank you for watching the content so far. If you've enjoyed it, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and then drop a comment. Who's the rookie that you're most excited about heading into this season? All right, let's do it. The 15th overall pick, hashtag Heat Culture, Kel'el Ware. And one of the reasons I'm really excited about Ware on Underdog specifically is he's listed as a wing. Well, my guy, Kel'el Ware, is also 7 feet tall, and I think he's going to play actual backup big minutes for the Miami Heat. If you look at the depth chart right now, Ware is actually listed ahead of Thomas Bryant, already slotted in to play the backup big minutes. Now, that might just be someone on ESPN projecting, but if that is the case, if you're getting Ware at the very end of your drafts, I don't know how many people in the So Rare auction streets are going to be aware of his potential role with the Heat. But if we've learned anything, if you're on the Miami Heat, you're probably going to overperform. Because right now, the starting five of the Heat look like this. You get Scary Terry at the 1, Hero at the 2, Jimmy at the 3, Kola Jovic at the 4, and Bam Bam Adebayo at the 5. And then off the bench, you get Jaime Jaquez, Alec Burks. The only other big competing with minutes for Kel'el Ware is Thomas Bryant. And we've seen the Thomas Bryant story. Now, Ware is going at the very end of drafts on Underdog right now. Deep at a pick 171. After guys like Kyle Anderson, Malcolm Brogdon, Rui Hachimura, and just before guys like Harrison Barnes, Kelly Olynyk, Norman Powell, Grayson Allen. And when we're late in these drafts, or when we're dumpster diving, bargain hunting for guys to round out our roster that have the potential at upside, I don't think it gets much better than Kel'el Ware. So there you have it. A lot of negativity at the top, but then a lot of positivity. I don't think we're getting a Victor Wembanyama or a Chet Holmgren this year, but I do think there are some useful rookies that we can take to help out our fantasy season. And again, if you want to take a look at our rankings for our top 20 NBA fantasy guards this season, find a link in the show notes, and we'll see you next time.